been quite a few council motions on this, and they've been quite carefully worded because they sort of say, insofar as the law allows, or we will take legal advice, and we don't intend to do this, but we will take legal advice. So I think there is potentially a degree of performativity in some of those motions that actually, once they talk to the legal department, they will realise that they are obliged to follow the law.
Now, the former chief of the Equality and Human Rights Commission has warned that women will be left to enforce single-sex rights themselves without the help of the Commission as new guidance comes into force today. The new EHRC code, which clarifies guidance on same-sex spaces, will remain largely unenforced because the equalities watchdog lacks the resources, according to its former boss, Baroness Faulkner. We're joined now by Dr. Mary-Ann Stephenson, the current chair of the EHRC. Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, the code, part of which sets out guidance on single-sex spaces like toilets, comes into force today. What will it actually change?
So the Equality Act protects all of us from...
It looks like, Dr. Stephenson, we have a bit of a problem with your line there. I think, Dr. Stephenson, we're just going to take a pause for a moment, see if we can get your line a bit more stable, and then we will come back to you, because I'm sure that people want to hear your answers clearly. One of the things, it's worth reading this piece in the Times today. It's on page 2 in the paper. The headline, "Poor Funding Leaves Women to Enforce Their Own Rights." It is a joint comment piece, but the tone of it from Baroness Faulkner is really quite striking. The frustration and the sense that, women are going to be almost sort of left to fight this battle alone. The last paragraph of it, I'll just read it to you. "It's not a historic day for women's rights, but the code is at least a tool in the armoury of those women and grassroots groups who will have to carry on fighting this uniquely ferocious war, and we salute them." That's the former chair of the EHRC. So you can sense the tone of frustration here.
Because there is a question: how else could it be enforced? Who is going to walk around changing rooms or bathrooms and actually enforce? This has always been the question. That some people would say, well, people have always just managed to cope, so actually the problem isn't as stated, as large as some people feel it. The counter-argument is there's clearly cases of people who are not biologically female using female-only spaces, but how exactly do you enforce it? OK, well, I think we can go back to Dr. Mary-Ann Stephenson now, the current chair of the EHRC. Dr. Stephenson, the question I asked you was that the code, which is obviously coming into force today, it sets out guidance on single-sex spaces. What will it change for people?
So the code actually covers all services, public functions and associations, and it covers all the protected characteristics. The Equality Act protects all of us from discrimination, and the Code of Practice is about how services in particular, but also public functions and associations can follow the law, and it gives guidance which is statutory, which means it can be taken into account in court. The bits that obviously got the most attention is around the part relating to sex and gender identity, and particularly following the Supreme Court ruling last year that sex in the Equality Act meant biological sex. Nothing changes today because the law was the law before the code came into practice. So services and associations should have already been following it, and we have been making that clear since the Supreme Court judgment last year.
And yet
what it does mean...
Well, I was just going to say on that point, and yet many of them aren't. If a council refuses to implement the code, as Green-led Lambeth and Green-led Hackney have both said they will refuse to implement this, what happens to them?
So if you look at the wording, there's been quite a few council motions on this, and they've been quite carefully worded because they sort of say, insofar as the law allows, or we will take legal advice, and we don't intend to do this, but we will take legal advice. So I think there is potentially a degree of performativity in some of those motions that actually, once they talk to the legal department, they will realise that they are obliged to follow the law. We have enforcement powers. We have powers to take action. We have powers to take legal action. We also have powers to work with organisations to make sure they understand what the law requires of them, provide additional guidance if needed, provide additional, sort of sector-specific support. But also, it won't just be us that councils need to think about, because they will also if they're breaking the law, if they are discriminating, they will be liable to cases brought by, individual members of the public who use their services.
Well, of course, but it may be costly or difficult for those individual members. Will the EHRC themselves take these councils, for example, to court if they do pursue a policy of refusing to implement this code?
Well, I can't comment on the individual cases and what we will and won't do in individual cases, but we do have powers to take enforcement action, and we do take action to enforce the Equality Act all the time.
I mean, do you have the money,
though?
It's no secret. Do you have the money?
It's no secret that our budget has been frozen for the last 10 years, so effectively we faced a real terms cut, and that does mean that there will always be more areas where we would like to take action than we have the capacity to do so, which means that we have to prioritise and we have to be strategic, and that is a combination of thinking about, cases that will help clarify the law, cases that might have an impact on a wider sector if they see how that happens. We also have to think across the code as a whole. I mean, the code covers all sorts of things. It covers, for example, disabled people's access to services. It covers the rights of people not to be discriminated on grounds of race when they're accessing services, or religion and belief, and so there's a whole range of areas where we may need to take action.
Is there something worrying, though, about the tone that we're hearing from some councils and actually some MPs in Parliament who have pushed back against this code themselves? I mean, the publication of it was delayed. Bridget Phillipson used to be responsible for that. She said at the time that she'd been consulting with the EHRC, but I mean, it's my understanding that that's not quite right, because you don't work for or with the government on policy. There has been a bit of a sense that maybe there is pushback against this code from some people in quite high office.
Well, I mean, certainly, there were MPs who are not happy with the code of practice, or, I mean, specifically, it's the Equality Act that's the issue for them, because the code does not make new law. The code is just guidance on how services and others can follow the law and ensure that they're not discriminating against people.
But does that attitude concern you? Does it worry you, that attitude?
Well, I mean, we are in a democracy. If members of Parliament think the law should be different to what it is, obviously they're entitled to say so and work to try and change the law. I think it's really important to recognise that, what the Equality Act does is balance the human rights of different groups of people, particularly in this sort of difficult and sensitive area around single-sex spaces. So, the starting point is that you shouldn't discriminate on the basis of sex. However, there are circumstances where you can, if it's a proportionate means of meeting a legitimate aim. And in those circumstances, if you're providing services differently or separately for women and men, that has to be on the basis of biological sex. But you also have to make sure that trans people who can't or don't want to use services for their biological sex, have services that they are able to use, and take action to do that. And so the Equality Act does that balancing act, and our code kind of explains what that means in practice.
Dr. Mary Ann Stephenson, current chair of the EHRC, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.